never meaning no harm. Beats all you never saw.
Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we're going to be covering Dime Store Detective Issues 3. I know we haven't covered Issue 2 yet. We're going to get to it at some point. This is just the most recent one that was released, and the author basically asked for as many reviews as possible, which I think is reasonable. To be quite frank, this is the one very good book from John Dexter, while I have far more reservations about his other superhero dog book. Here we're dealing with a fairly simple thematic, which is a supernatural suspense / detective story. It's very well framed. It flows really well, issues to issues. And this is a thing that I find interesting about this one. It doesn't feel like this should just be one big trade paperback. Each of the issues brings something up over time, really works as those individual issues. So that's a thing to keep in mind here. Issue 2 had a lot of backstory for what's occurring to the Kinder family and a few other events in between, but nothing that I really need to frame before we look into this particular book. It's pretty clear at this point that Detective McKinder is absolutely aided by the brass because he doesn't play ball with the government officials and the other fairly rich people across Georgia. He also has a very strong moral center. He shows it as a detective, and this is something that he learned from his father, even though his father was a criminal. And we see that he's actually pretty good at digging into files, digging into the numbers to figure out what needs to be figured out. One thing that we also learn here is that people often accuse him to try to redeem the crimes of his family by being a detective. The second character that's of a fairly significant importance here is Detective Blanche, who's McKinder's previous girlfriend or wife. I'm not quite sure. It's not completely explained. Who's one of the detectives that actually does want to play ball with the officials. She does want to play ball with them, but she still helps out Detective McKinder, and she does seem to have at least a decent moral center and wants to do what is right. She is literally the good cop to McKinder's bad cop in a lot of situations, and it seems to work. We do get more of the McKinder brothers in this one, and things are really not going well for the McKinder boys. Ricky went from being just a violent douchebag to being a murderous violent douchebag after he was possessed by an evil spirit in an underground cave. This is not fully explained, and it could be supernatural, probably is, or it could be just weird instincts. That's what makes it a little bit interesting here. We do have a bit of nuance, and we do have Bobby being a criminal, but trying to uphold his own moral code, trying to avoid senseless violence and senseless death. So we see that it's very different from his brother Ricky. The last character we get is David Chandler III. And this would not have gone past most mainstream editors, as he is a rich, white, flamboyantly gay cuties enjoyer, basically. That would make him very difficult to frame as a negative character in modern media. One thing we do learn is that he's probably one of the last person who saw the last victim, Justine, alive, and that he has some connections to the whole thing. Our story begins as Detective McKinder and Detective Blanche are talking to Justine's father. As the last victim of a serial murder, he's a pretty important figure to try to figure out what's going on. We start to see that there's a bit of discrepancy between the story Justine was telling her parents and real life. Her father basically believed she was working as a bartender and lived very well while going to college. But once we start digging into things, well, she has lots of high-end clothes and lots of high-end things that you wouldn't be able to afford on a bartender's salary. There's also the fact that she didn't go to college anymore, and, things start piling up a little bit, and they start believing that she might have done some horizontal work as well as some vertical work when she was doing her bartending, let's say. So things get a little bit more dicey, and we have a little bit more of an idea of just what might be going on. The pair then goes over to the stadium to interrogate Justine's boyfriend, a footballer that has a full ride scholarship. When I say footballer here, I mean a football player with American football, not grass dive, real football. They basically use a good cop, bad cop approach to it. It might not be intentional with how McKinder is acting. The boy gets fairly mad at Mackinder, insinuating that Justine might have been a streetwalker or a night lady. But Blanche takes him aside, and he opens up to her a little bit. They learn about someone that he calls Purple Mercedes guy, who was seen around Justine and he felt was a little bit suspect. And he knew that Purple Mercedes guy was, not just another boyfriend because he was a bit flamboyantly gay. While heading back to the station to get some detail on Purple Mercedes, Mackinder start reminiscing about the past and talking about it with Blanche. And it nudges him back to that 1981 day where his father was trying to teach him how to shave at 9 years old. And Ricky shows up and tells Bobby that it's time to get to work. Ricky apparently stole a Mustang, and they go to the bar where the other moonshiners are hanging out and slam the car into the bikes. This is the first decent crash scene we've seen in comics recently, by the way, if you have been keeping tracks. This, of course, leads to a full-on brawl. Ricky and Bobby just basically start beating up everybody. And Ricky kind of goes off the rail, trying to get information from a guy to know who sold out the location of their still by, pulling one of his eyes out. This is actually a pretty gruesome scene. When that happens, they learn that Tammy, who's Ricky's part-time girlfriend, it seems, is also sleeping with Lionel and sold them out. We do get an idea that it was real. It was not just a lie made up by the other guy, as the Lionel's crew call Tammy, and Ricky intercepts the call. She gets into the car using some very weak reasoning. Ricky starts getting fairly mad and starts choking her. Bobby breaks, and we're not 100% sure if the breaking is what actually led to her neck being broken, or if it's the Ricky's actions. Bobby's implicated in the whole thing, and they decide to go dump the body in the Appalachians, and I would believe that this is where we found the original victim in the first issue. We return to present day, and Mackinder is digging up the DMV for some details, and his current partner interrupts him, and we learn that the partner is basically there to keep tabs on him, that Mackinder and him don't really see eye to eye, Mackinder having a stronger moral center than his partner. Legend Mackinder have a quick chat while they're in the car, trying to see if they found anything in the DMV's data, only to pull out David Chandler III, since he does own a purple Roadster Mercedes and kind of fits the bill as the mysterious benefactor for Justine, as he is, well, flamboyantly gay. They do stop at the rich man's estate to start interrogating him, and Chandler keeps trying to redirect questions and redirect the discussion to Mackinder and his family history. And when the questions start getting into a direction he doesn't like, well, he tells them to leave, to which Mackinder says, hey, you know that cuties porn that happened a couple years ago? I remember your name on the list, but you never came up for charge. How's that happened? And uses a little bit of elbow room to try to get things rolling. David Chandler opens up, basically telling them about a super rich and powerful gathering where one can basically do whatever they kind of want, from what we understand. And it's very secretive, very ush-ush. It also leads them to linking the other victims to these gatherings. So things are looking a little bit dicey for Chandler, but I mean, he's helping out the fuzz at this point. And he also says that he will never go back to one of those meetings because during the ritual at the start of the gathering, the fire spoke and it said that it needed to kill Detective Kinder. So there's a lot of things going on in a fairly short issue, and it does give us a lot of things that we can play with and a lot of things that we can think about, even though we have a fairly good idea of, who's the bad guys, who's the good guys. We still have a little bit of leeway, a little bit of room to play with, and we still have a lot of things to learn about this region of Georgia where Mackinder is working in. The primary cover for this book is very interesting. It's the kind of thing that would attract attention in store. What I think is actually a little bit better on this one is that we actually don't have that hot, sexy chick on it. I know it's weird, but follow me here. This makes it different. It's not like all of those other indie books that we keep seeing. I know some people will go and talk about all sorts of things here, but it is a thing that is just about everywhere. And it's nice to actually have a manly main character in an actual book here. Another fun thing is that the masked figures at the bottom could be just about anything. We've got that spooky cavern art at the top here that we're not quite sure what it is. So everything meshes together in that weird mystical way that makes this particular cover quite effective and something that I would actually see on something like Bob Moran in France or something like that as well. The branding does work, but I do think it's the weakest part of this cover. I would probably have gone with a two-tone on it like we have in the book, just to give it a little bit of a different flair to it. It's not awful, but maybe on a trade paperback or on a compilation of those books. Usually here you would hear me talk about the quality of the paper, the ads, and all that stuff, but honestly, this book, I got it through digital, very lightweight, which is nice, and the quality is pretty good on a lightweight PDF. 27 pages overall, a little bit longer than your average floppy. No ads, no fuss, nothing outside of the story in this one. It's straightforward, very straight pipe, nothing to really talk about. First thing we have to say when we look at the art here is that we still have that nice dichotomy between the full color present and the black and white past. Still think the black and white portions could be in yellowish newspaper and black instead, but there's differences in the printing costs and stuff. I understand that. But it's not a bad setup. And it does give us that good slash here between what is currently going on, what was going on, and it's easy to identify everything. Black and white sequences are much better in terms of shading and coloring, grayscaling, than we had in the previous issue. The fight scene looks really good. Does give a lot of nuance in the characters and what's going on. So that's a very nice improvement from what we had in previous issues, but it's not as good as what you can sometimes see in other black and white comics. Everything in this is meant to be realistic. We don't have anything cartoonish or caricatural in this. As far as the characters, the locations, the vehicles, everything is meant to look real. People do look, you look at that young man here, everything looks a little bit too old. There's not enough difference between some of the characters. That's something that could be emphasized, but it doesn't break your reading experience. Character costumes, character clothes, they're what we expect them to be. There's nothing out of the ordinary here, but there's also nothing that's really eye-catching. It works for what it's supposed to be. It's really what we would expect from a police procedural or a police TV show. It's nothing super fancy, but it's nothing awful either. The characters themselves are also not the most imaginative, but we do have a fairly wide range of them. We've got a really old man at the start. We've got this jock here, which I think looks a little bit too old to be a college student, but that's just me probably. We've got middle-aged detective, we've got middle-aged man, we've got a little kid. The range is fairly wide, and it really helps with at least having a bit of diversity in what's going on. The backgrounds in this are generally pretty good. We don't have a whole lot of background characters, but the background work itself works really well. There's very few shortcuts being used. We've got, a full stadium here as an example. When the car's driving around, we get buildings in the back. It works for what it is supposed to do, and it's actually better than what we have in many comics out there that do use a lot of shortcuts. As I was saying during the story element here, the car crashing into the motorcycle is actually really good. We do have that car lifting up that we rarely see when we're dealing with car crashes. The car should probably have been shown with a little bit more damage to it, unless it was mounted with a ram in the front. You do see that in destruction derby vehicles as an example. But this is probably, like I said, one of the best car crashes I have seen in a little while here. The car itself also looks really good. The Mustang that we had before, this particular car here. The motorcycle is functional as well. We've got a few limousines that are shown from afar, but they work really well as well. What I'm a little bit sad about is that we don't see that purple Mercedes that we talk about. It would have been important to show it when the detectives get to David's house, so we have really that visual element here of the character. Another thing is that even though those cars are older and they're a little bit boatish, they're larger, The insides here, when we look at the inside of the vehicle, looks more realistic than we had in a few of the previous comics that we looked at recently. What we've seen a lot recently is very roomy vans, which kind of works if you're compositing from you're drawing the van and then you're drawing the inside of it. The thing is, people should be a little bit more cramped in a car, especially in most modern cars where things are a little bit cramped for security reason. It's nice to see this attention to detail here. There are a few things I do want to talk about in the story and things surrounding it. The first thing I would say is that this particular line, which is supposed to be in Latin, should be in Latin. It's not super easy to find a Latin translator, but it's not terrible either. It would increase the air of mystery and evil that we get in this particular scene. Maybe using another language in Latin as well could have been used. Latin is the go-to for a lot of people for this. Who knows? Maybe there's different things that could have been used. I just would have much preferred it to be its original language rather than this translation based. Throughout this story, we do see that Bobby McKinder that knows that he's in trouble. He's already trying to impart everything that he has and can give to his son, even though his son is young to understand what's going on. The whole shaving thing, that's the thing a dad would do, but usually with a son that's a little bit older, just as a bonding element and as a way to show what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. You also have the real feeling that evil is stemming out of Ricky McKinder. Was not the most reasonable person before. Detective McKinder does say that as well, and maybe it only pushed him over the edge. But he really takes everything to the next level. And he was going to blind this man completely by pulling out both of his eyes. Just pulling one of them is gruesome enough. He's trying to get his brother to feel responsible for his murder, seeing that he's going from being a violent person but still have a half-decent art to someone who has absolutely no respect for anything, a true sociopath, basically. For Detective McKinder, we do start to understand why the local elite kind of hates him so much. And what we also get is that the elite probably are not the best people to want to rub elbows with. They are not good people, at least not the ones that we're introduced here with this weird ritual and all those gatherings. McKinder's partner, Rudy, is more or less of an afterthought in the 3 books that we've seen. We've seen him a few times. But here we really see that he's there to keep tabs on McKinder and that he doesn't really have the same moral compass that McKinder has, and he's ready to enjoy life more than do the right thing. Blanche is also more present in this book, and while she's not connected to our hero directly anymore, I mean, they're not in a relationship anymore, you see that she's trying to move up by trying to be friendly with elite that we're seeing are not the best people around. But this is a thing that might change now that we learn more about them and that she learns more about them as well through their dealing with David Chandler. Fun thing about McKinder is that he is basically at this point in the same category as Alex Jones. He calls out bullshit, he calls out the evil of the elite, but it might not be for the right reasons. And a little bit like we're doing with Alex Jones now, we're learning about those reasons, and they might be even worse than what we were expecting. As I was saying at the start of the video, the pacing in this is really good, and it really feels like separate episodes and separate issues rather than just a part of a bigger graphic novel. And there's 3 really strong parts in this. We've got an investigative start to the story of the McKinder brother fall into insanity, a step up in the exposition of who those criminal powers are now after Ricky's reign of terror. We'll see where it goes in later issues, but it does feel like there's a continuation of one to the other. We're not overloaded with set piece and action scenes in this. There's actually not a whole lot of action, but the big fight scene with the McKinder brothers is nice. It's fairly interesting and different from a lot of comics that we see out there. The pacing in this is also a bit weird if you're used to crowdfunded comics. It really grew into its own, and I can't wait to see where this is going, and this is what we want in this kind of book. It did go harder than I thought it would here. It's a big step in a very dark direction. Honestly, that's a good thing. It's not pulling punches, it's going hard where it needs to go. Honestly, we have very few police procedural comics coming out in the Indiesphere, especially in America. Bande dessinée has quite a few of them, and it used to be a little bit more popular in the past, but it's something that would need to have probably a few more people writing in that style, in that genre, to interest more people to that particular style. This is a thing that I really hope people get their hands on. It's a wordy effort and a fun story to read with a lot of nice plot hooks that bring us to a potentially nice resolution. We'll see how it goes. That's really how it is. And that's what makes this book interesting. So I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. Thank you for listening to me for so long. Keep on reading comics, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep reviewing and analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.